So first of all, thank you all so much for coming today. We're really excited to be bringing you the first of a new series of free monthly webinars. Today is Reports That Write Themselves, Automate Reporting with Quarto. So I'm going to be taking you through an introduction to Quarto, which is a free and open source publishing framework. I'll walk you through the steps of building an example report. And then yeah, I'll give you a reminder of the schedule for some upcoming webinars as well. First, just have a bit of housekeeping to do. So I'll start by introducing Jumping Rivers, who are bringing this webinar series. So Jumping Rivers are a data science consultancy. We're based in the northeast of England, and we provide consultancy on all things data science. So we work on projects for a wide range of clients. We offer roughly 50 different training courses covering lots of different topics from beginner programming right up to deep learning. We offer assistance with machine learning, DevOps, code review, infrastructure, including cloud environments as well. And we also do a lot of work around dashboard development as well. So if you've got any interest in shiny dashboards and that sort of thing, we do a lot of that as well. I've just had a question through the chat of will I be sharing the slides or the video recording? Yes. So this video is being recorded and it's going to go up on YouTube afterwards, and we'll share the link with you after the session. So you will still have access to all of this after the session is finished. By all means, feel free to take screenshots as well during the webinar itself, but you will have access to the recording afterwards. Okay. So I'll just introduce myself as well. So I'm Myles. I have a background in astrophysics and data science. So before I started at Jumping Rivers, I was doing a PhD in astrophysics at Durham University. I've been at Jumping Rivers now for about 3 years or so. I'm a principal data scientist, and so my work is split between project management. So I lead a number of client projects that we offer for our clients. I get quite hands-on with Python in particular. So I've worked on some Python machine learning projects and Python code development and that sort of thing. And I'm also very much involved in our teaching side of things. So I'm involved in the writing of a number of our courses and in delivering these. So I've taught courses in Python, SQL, machine learning, and more. Just some hobbies, because why not? I enjoy anything outdoors and traveling. So that's a picture of me from Greece from last year. Cool. So just to go through some final housekeeping before we get started with the main topic. The goal of this webinar series is basically to provide you with a diverse range of speakers and partners, both from within Jumping Rivers and externally. We hope that by attending these, you'll gain some practical skills in the latest tools in R, Python, Posit, and Shiny. So we've got these webinars running from now until December once a month, and you'll be seeing all these topics being covered. These are designed to be flexible, so we've got them online so you can attend them wherever you are. And it's just a nice chance to get some free learning in some new topics. Just as some extra incentive, we do also have some discounts available to you by attending these. So here are some discount codes. So we've got coming up in the next couple of months, we've got Shiny in Production, which is an annual conference taking place on the 8th and 9th of October. This is a conference on all things Shiny. I'll be saying a bit more about the format of this at the end of the session today. But if you're interested in registering for that, you've got this discount code JRSIP30, which will get you 30% off the registration fee. You also get a discount for our training courses. So like I said, we've got courses in beginner programming, data visualization, machine learning, and more. So if you have any interest in that, you can check out our training catalog at jumpingrivers.com/training, where you can find the full list of courses that we offer, as well as the current public schedule. So we do also run public courses as well as bespoke courses. So if you've got any interest in that, feel free to reach out to us. And if you want to take a screenshot or make a note, you can use that discount code to get 30% off. I will also have these at the end of the webinar today as well, so don't worry if you don't manage to take these down now. Just some Zoom etiquette rules. So today we're using a Zoom webinar format, which is a bit different from a standard Zoom call. So you'll not have a chat, but you will have access to a Q&A. So as I go through the main presentation, which will last roughly 30 minutes or so, 35 minutes, you can submit any questions that you have via the Q&A chat option, and I'll be able to answer some of these questions as they appear. Any questions that I don't manage to answer, I'll make sure I come back to those during the post-presentation Q&A, which will be about 10 minutes long. So I'll make sure to go through any open questions then. If at that stage you've got additional questions, feel free to continue posting these through the Q&A. You can also raise your hand if you want to be unmuted. Okay, so if I see you raise your hand, I will click the unmute button next to you so you can ask your question out loud. But yeah, just to keep things running smoothly, for the time being, I would suggest that we just use the Q&A chat, at least for the next half hour or so, and we can have a bit more discussion at the end of the session. And finally, I've already mentioned this webinar is being recorded. We'll be sharing this on YouTube afterwards. Just in case you've got any concerns about being featured in a public YouTube video, just to note, you won't be visible in this recording unless you ask yourself to be unmuted. Okay, so if you don't want to be featured in that final recording, you can just send your questions through the Q&A chat. I'm the only one who can see those, and then you'll not be visible on that final recording. Great. So that brings us on to the main topic for today. So we're going to learn about Quarto. So just first of all, to give a bit of context, Jumping Rivers is an official partner of Posit, who maintain a number of products that you might have heard of. The most popular of these is probably RStudio IDE. So this is a really popular development environment for R programming, which I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with. Posit also maintain various cloud platforms, including Posit Connect, which is used for hosting apps and APIs, Posit Workbench, which is a cloud environment for running code, and Posit Package Manager, which is a really nice environment for managing R and Python packages for your projects. Posit also maintain a number of free and open source frameworks, including Quarto, which is going to be the focus of today. And this is used for automated reporting. I'll say a bit more about what that actually means very shortly. Posit also maintain Shiny, which is a really popular framework for web development, so for web apps and that sort of thing. And you might have also heard of Vetiver, which is a really nice MLOps framework, so machine learning operations. So that has a lot of functionality for training machine learning models, versioning these models, deploying them to the cloud, monitoring the models. So these are all really nice frameworks, and they're all completely free and open source. So it's well worth checking these out. And the best thing of all is that they are multilingual by design. So these are all compatible with R and Python and more. Regardless of whether you're coming from an R background or a Python background today, everything I'm going to cover is going to be applicable to both languages, which is really nice. So what is Quarto? Quarto is essentially the next generation of R Markdown. Okay, so R Markdown is basically plain text files, which you can render into a number of output formats. So you start with a text file with your Markdown text, and you've got some formatting options, and then you can render that and convert it into PDFs, so like PDF reports, HTML documents for the web, presentation slides. So it's a really nice format. And one of the main things about R Markdown is that it combines code with plain text. So if you're ever writing a document and you want to have both code and text visible, both Quarto and R Markdown are really good choices for that. Even better, the code can actually be run dynamically when you generate the document. So that means any figures and so like tables and plots in the report, the code that's used to create these plots can be embedded into the report. So it means as your data changes, you can just regenerate the report and all of the content within that report will be dynamically regenerated without you having to, fiddle around with copying the latest version of your plot back into the report. It's just automatic. It's basically just a part of the report already. So that's really nice. So we'll be seeing how to create a basic report during this webinar, and we'll be covering things like inserting tables, inserting plots, and that sort of thing. Like I said before, it works with a number of different languages and output formats. I've included a link to the Quarto gallery here, so you can access this in the Quarto documentation. So that's just quarto.org. And this just gives a nice overview of all the different formats that you can create with Quarto. So just to give some examples, HTML, that would be a good choice for web development. So if you have a report that you want to be hosted on the web, you could create a report like this. You can also create presentations, HTML presentations, and the slides that I'm presenting today is actually an HTML slide deck that I produced with Quarto. So everything you see during this presentation, so all of the animations that you see, all of this has been produced with Quarto. We're not really going to be going into into how to create presentations with Quarto. We're going to be focusing more on the reporting side. But just so you're aware, you can also create professional presentations with Quarto as well, which you might find useful. Just to go back to the Quarto gallery, you can also produce PDFs. You can produce PDFs that match certain templates. So if you're from an academic background, Quarto has support for a number of journal templates, like statistical journals and that sort of thing. So if that's of interest to you, that's one way of producing your papers. Rather than using LaTeX, you can just use Quarto, and it'll use LaTeX as a backend. It does also have some compatibility with Microsoft Word. And yeah, like I said, presentations. So yeah, you've got a lot of different choices. You can also make dashboards as well. So if you want to make data dashboards, which are interactive, you can use Quarto to do that as well. So it's kind of like an alternative to using Shiny. So yeah, if you're interested in any of these, you can have a look here. And the Quarto documentation is really good. So if you feel like I've missed anything during today's talk, I would suggest having a look at the Quarto documentation, because it's full of really helpful tutorials and examples for putting together these various types of documents. So how does it actually work? A Quarto file is basically just a plain text file which has a QMD extension. To download it, you can go to quarto.org, and this has the instructions for downloading Quarto. If you already have RStudio installed, chances are you'll already have Quarto installed, because recent versions of RStudio come with Quarto by default. So if you open RStudio on your computer, you'll probably find that you've already got the option to create a Quarto file, and then to render that file. If you have an older version of RStudio, then you might not have that installed. So you might just want to update your current version of RStudio in that case. So yeah, Quarto is compatible with RStudio. It's also compatible with a number of other popular IDEs. So VS Code would be one of my favorite IDEs for developing Python and R code. And you can install the Quarto extension for VS Code. So it's free to install, only takes a few seconds. And then you'll have all of the sort of features and compatibility in VS Code of Quarto that you would have with RStudio. Quarto does also have some compatibility with Jupyter. So Jupyter is a format for creating notebooks, which mix together plain text with code cells, and it's designed so that the code cells can be dynamically run by the user. From the command line, you can actually take a Jupyter notebook and you can convert that into a PDF report, which mixes together text and code. You can convert it into an HTML report. So Jupyter, to some extent, actually acts as sort of an alternative to the Quarto text file. You can take a Jupyter notebook and you can convert that into these various output formats in the same way as you can with a Quarto document. It might be slightly more limited in the output formats that you can create, but But yeah, that is possible. And then yeah, you can also just use a text editor like VI or Vim, because it is just a text file behind the scenes. So you can just open it as a text file and just edit it that way. Insert the main text, tune the configuration settings, and then you can render a Quarto document from the command line using Quarto render. So it does act as a command line interface, as well as being integrated into a number of these IDEs. Before I get stuck into creating a Quarto document, you might be wondering why you would choose Quarto over R Markdown. And that's a question I get asked quite a lot. So the first thing to bear in mind is Quarto is by design multi-language and multi-engine. Okay, so R Markdown by design depends heavily on R. Okay, you need to have R installed in order to use R Markdown. Um, with Quarto, on the other hand, you don't need to have R installed. It's designed so that it has compatibility with a number of different programming languages, R and Python included. And it does have a number of different engines for actually running the embedded code within the document. So with R Markdown, you technically could have Python code embedded in the document, but R Markdown was really using Reticulate to run that Python code. So it was actually using R to run the Python code. With Quarto, you've got multiple engines. So you've got knitr for executing the R code, and you've got Jupyter for executing the Python code. So we're using actual, native Python tools for executing the Python code, and that means you could, for example, use a Jupyter kernel, which matches, say, a virtual environment that you've been working with in Python. You can use that to run all of the code within the document, which is quite nice. Quarto is also, I think, just a bit more user-friendly. Like I said, there's no requirement for R. It's also easier to host Quarto outputs on the web. So I'll get to this again at the end, but there's a number of different um, sort of routes you can go down for publishing Quarto documents. There's Quarto Pub, which is free to use. It's very easy to publish directly to Posit Connect and that sort of thing. I believe it's also got a nice integration with WebR as well, which is a way of running R code within the browser. So again, you can have Quarto HTML documents, which essentially run in the browser, and the embedded R code will also run just through the browser. So it's kind of like serverless web hosting. So it's very user friendly, and it makes it really easy for web hosting and these kinds of things. It combines the functionality of a number of different R packages like R Markdown, Bookdown, and Distill, and so on into a single command line interface. So you can run it from the command line, and essentially it's got all the functionality of these different softwares behind the scenes. So it's much more generalized than R Markdown was. It doesn't require all these additional libraries. Also, because Quarto is essentially the next generation of R Markdown, new features will continue to be added to Quarto in the future. R Markdown is not going anywhere. That is still maintained. You can still use that if you're happy with that. It's just that features which are added to Quarto in the future aren't necessarily going to be brought across to R Markdown as well. So just bear that in mind. So if you already have a lot of documents in R Markdown, you might want to consider migrating those across to Quarto, which is actually not too bad. It's a little bit tedious. There's a few minor syntax differences, but you might want to do that now rather than have an even bigger task of migrating this across later on. But that said, if you are happy with R Markdown and you're happy with the current features and you don't need anything to change with your current setup with R Markdown, by all means, stick with it because it is still a really powerful framework. Finally, Quarto also has a number of ways of customizing formats. So Quarto uses what are called Lua extensions. I'll not really be touching on these during the talk today, but essentially these slides which I'm presenting from, I've essentially added a Quarto extension called a Lua extension to my local machine. And this is where everything like the CSS styling is defined, the font types, the font sizes throughout this presentation, even the color scheme. So the color for the text, for the logos, for that little progress bar at the bottom. This is all being configured using an extension. And I could then, if I wanted to, I could then share that extension with my colleagues, so that we're all using a slide deck with consistent branding and consistent formatting. So extensions are really useful, and Quarto in particular has a lot of pre-built templates that you can use, including templates for academic journals, for example. That's another potential advantage. You've got a lot of sort of custom pre-built templates that have already been created, which you can just import into your document. So let's go about creating an example Quarto document, and I'll not spend too long on this, but just to show you the basics. So the way this works is I'm going to do this through RStudio, but like I said, you could also do this through VS Code using the Quarto extension. But in RStudio, you can click File, New File, and then select Quarto document. So I'm just going to open up RStudio. So hopefully you can see this okay. I think some of the text will look quite small, but hopefully at least you can see the actual code in this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on File at the top left here, New File, and then you'll notice that RStudio by default has Quarto document as a file type that you can create. And this is right below R scripts. It's quite high up. Like I said, if you have a recent version of RStudio installed, you should already have this as an option. So if I create Quarto document, it will prompt me to enter a few things. So I'm just going to give it a title like example report. I'll add myself as an author, and then you're asked to choose an output format. I'm going to just leave this as HTML, but you could also create a PDF report, which is actually using LaTeX behind the scenes if you wanted. And you've also got compatibility of Microsoft Word. So I'm going to keep this as HTML. So I'm just going to click create. And what that will do is it will create a sort of template document that I can play around with. The way this works, you've got two ways to view a Quarto document in RStudio. You've got the source pane, and this will basically allow you to view the text code, the actual plain text, essentially. So this is kind of the raw Quarto document, what it actually looks like. So the way a Quarto document is structured is you've got what's called the YAML header at the top, and this is where you specify the settings and the sort of top level configuration for the document. Then you've also got this markdown body where is where you basically give your main text. So this is where we include headings. We include the main body of text in the document. So that's the source tab. There's also a visual tab where you can view this as the final rendered document, essentially. This is quite nice if you don't like coding. Okay, so if you don't enjoy programming, you can essentially edit a Quarto document as though it's like a Word document. So you've got all the options up here that you would typically see in something like Microsoft Word or in Google Slides. So I've got the option to create bullet points. I can just add some items to these bullet points if I wish. If I go back to the source view, you'll see that Quarto behind the scenes is actually it's still doing this using Markdown syntax. So it's given us hyphens for the bullet points. But if you hadn't known how to do that, you can just do it through this visual tab if you prefer. So if you don't want to learn Markdown, you can just use this visual tab, and you can essentially edit this like a standard Word document. So you can choose your header size, you can insert tables, figures, that sort of thing. For this session, though, I'm going to mainly focus on the actual source view for this document. So I'm just going to save the current version of this. So I'll just call it example report.qmd. And it's important to give that QMD extension as well, just so RStudio remembers that this is a Quarto document that we're setting up. Cool, so I've got an example document, and I'll just go back to the slides and we'll look at some of the things that you can do with this. Hopefully you're all following this so far. If you do have any questions at all, just feel free to start posting them in the Q&A just to get the ball rolling. So the first thing that you have in a Quarto document is this YAML header. So this is fenced by these sets of hyphens at the top and bottom. And then for each line here, you've got a setting and it's being assigned to a value. So you've got things like the title and the author, but you've also got settings that control the overall format. So if you use HTML for format here, that's going to create an HTML report. You can also load in extensions with this as well. So if you're using like a style template and you're using a Lua extension for that, you can insert that here as well. So you can actually have a custom format which uses your custom extension that you've built. So it doesn't just have to be one of the default formats. It could be a custom format that you've created yourself. You can also select some formatting, which should be applied across the entire document. And yeah, like I said, you can include predefined styles using Quarto extensions. So to build an HTML report, we're going to need text. We're going to need things like links, images, code, embedded tables and plots, references. So just to go through some of the steps, you'll be inserting the main body of text using Markdown. So I'll not spend too long on Markdown, but essentially Markdown is just a sort of plain text language, which allows you to essentially create very basic Word documents. So you can have bold text using a double asterisk, you can have italics, you can include headings, and the more hashes that you prefix the heading with, the lower down that heading is going to be. So this would be like your overall title, then you might have a chapter, then you've got your heading, subheading, subheading, and so on. Build points can be inserted using hyphens. You can have numbered lists as well. And you don't have to worry about giving these the correct numbers. Quarto will automatically index these 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can just have all of these prefixed with ones, and that will work. Actually, it'll be absolutely fine. So you can also include links in a document. So the way we do that in Markdown is we give square brackets, we insert the text that the link should appear as when you view it, but then you can insert the actual URL for the hyperlink in these round brackets. So this is how that would look. So what we see is Quarto documentation, but when you hover over it with the mouse, you can see it's highlighted, and I can then click on that, and that brings up the Quarto documentation. Okay, so that's how we insert a basic link. You can also insert images in Markdown. So like I said, you can do this with the visual editor in RStudio. So you can just click insert and then just load in a figure or an image. You can also do this using Markdown. So you can use an exclamation mark, square brackets, round brackets to include the actual image file. And then you can also include your alt text for the image. So this would be if you're using like an audible sort of reader when you're scrolling through the web, you can have essentially the contents of a web page read out to you by a voice, and it will use the alt text in this case to sort of read that out to you. So this is all about web accessibility. Basically, it's a really good practice to have alt text for all of your images. And you can also insert code chunks. So just to start with, I'll just take my documents that I've got here. I will, for now, just get rid of that sort of initial default text body. And then I'm just going to copy in some new text, which I prepared earlier. So I'll just copy that in here. So this is all formatted as Markdown. So we've got a sort of sub section here. We've got a link here. We've got an image, so I'll try clicking render and see if that works. Yep, so I've now got an example report. This is like an example HTML report. It's about lemurs because why not? Why shouldn't it be lemurs? And we can go through this and sort of tidy it up a little bit. So we can insert a hyperlink. So instead of having that full URL being posted in the text, let's actually just hide that behind Duke Lemur Center. And then if I click this button that says render on save, this will automatically re-render on this tab when I save the document. So we can see we've now got a hyperlink. We can insert bold text if we want in various places. And again, that renders as expected. And we've got an image here as well, which has been copied in. Just to note, I need to have that image available locally to do this. So I've got the mongoose lemur.png file here, so that was possible. Okay. So I've got my example Quarto document, which looks great. I'll just go through some guidelines for inserting code into this as well. So if you want to add code chunks to a document, so let's say, for example, let's say you want to have some data analysis in the report. So you want to have some plots and tables which have been produced using R. The way that we'll insert that is by using an R code chunk. Okay. So the way that works is inside our Quarto document, I'm going to fence off what's going to become the code chunk. I use curly brackets just to specify that this is an R code chunk. And then we copy in the code that we want for this. So in this case, this chunk might be loading in some data using read R. Okay, so this is just loading in this lemur CSV data from this public URL. And if I run this, we'll see that that code chunk is now visible. Now, it might be that we don't actually want the code to be visible in the document. If that's the case, I can include what's called a chunk option. So we use a hash followed by a pipe to insert a chunk option. And then if we use echo, this allows us to control the visibility of the chunk. So if I say echo and assign that to false, that will hide the code chunk from the document. Okay. So behind the scenes, that code has actually run as I've rendered that document. But we're just not seeing the code. That code has been hidden from the reader. Okay, but we do now have this lemurs table available to us if we want to do some additional data analysis. So just to give an example of this, I might include some additional code chunks. So I might include this code chunk, which does some data wrangling. So we're just dropping some missing values. We're filtering the data, and then we are visualizing that as a table. And then we might have another code chunk which is being used to visualize the data as a plot. Okay, so in both of these cases, I have set echo to false, so these code chunks should be invisible, but the code itself that's underlying should still run. So I'm going to click render. This might take a little while because I think it is quite a big data set. But that seems to have worked. So if I go to my data analysis section, I can see that I now have this table in my report. I can't see the code that was used to create the table, but I do have this now as an actual figure in my report. And I've also got my plot as well of the weight of the lemurs against the age of the lemurs. Okay. So that looks pretty good. One thing you might notice is I've also set this other chunk option. So I've set message to false. The reason for that is because if I don't set that option, what will happen is any output messages from running the code will then be printed into the document. So if you don't want any of the messages from the code being outputted, you can just include that option message and set that equal to false. So we get the plot, but we don't get this extra message being printed out. Now, it might be that that message is useful to the reader. So, it depends on the context. So if we're producing this as like a set of notes on how to use R, in that case, you might want to include these code messages for context, and you'll probably want to include the actual code cells themselves. If, on the other hand, this is just intended as a statistical report, and the only thing that matters is the results and the plots, then you might want to hide the code cells from view. Just a final note as well, I've used knitr, I've used the cable function from knitr to visualize the table. If you search the documentation for cable, it's basically got a lot of customization options for how the table gets displayed. So there are options to have individual rows of the table highlighted and that sort of thing. So that's why I've used Cable here to do this. So I recommend having a look through the documentation there. So that's just an example of a very basic document. I'm not going to worry too much about polishing it up, but that essentially is to get you started. And if you wanted, you could include some additional text. So below, we visualize the lemur weight as a function of the age. So you can include text in the document, and this will all appear in the location that you've inserted it. So just re-rendering that, and you can see now we've got some text here that's appeared. So you can basically build this up and create a full data report. By default, the styling might not be particularly appealing, but you can have a look through some of the pre-built extensions. I'll share some links at the end of this, just so you can see some useful resources for that. So just to go through a few more of those chunk options, there's also an eval option, which controls whether or not the code is evaluated. By default, all code cells are set to evaluate. You can also set global options via that YAML header that we saw at the top of the document. So you could have this execute option. You can set message equals false if you don't want any of the code chunk messages to be visual. You can also have collapsing code chunks. So if you set code fold set to true, that code can still be accessed by the user, but it then goes into this kind of drop-down sort of menu, which is quite nice. And yeah, we've already seen those example plots and tables. Just another thing as well, you can also have inline code as well. So in the main text, you can have certain stats being outputted to the reader. So if you want, you could have a sentence inside the document which accesses a variable which has been defined within one of the code cells, and then that variable will become visible within the main text of the report. So the idea of automated reporting, you're not just reducing the headache, of having to regenerate all these figures. Even the text itself can be dynamically regenerated when your data changes, which is quite handy. So the idea of all of this is, as your data changes, it should just be a case of you go back to your Quarto document, you just press that render button, and everything should update nicely for you with very minimal effort. Just in case you're not convinced at this stage, I'm just going to explore some additional use cases. So I've already mentioned you can produce really polished looking presentations. So these slides that I'm using today, this is a slide deck that I've created using Quarto. So the output format, if you want to create presentations, is called Reveal.js. So if you go back to that, to your document, instead of having HTML, change that to Reveal.js. That's the format that's used to create these kind of HTML slides that I'm presenting today. And you can have a look through the Quarto documentation just for some examples of how to split up your slides and that sort of thing. It's also a really nice way to demonstrate code. So if you're given a presentation and you need to demonstrate code as part of that, you can have these code cells, but you can even highlight individual lines of code. So I can have these really nice transitions within the slide, which I think is really cool. So as a trainer and as someone who does a lot of workshops on Python and R and that sort of thing, I find this feature really useful. So it's really engaging for teaching. You can also use CSS styling. So if you know anything about CSS, you can use that to style everything from like the font types to the font sizes to the colors to the logos. And like I said, there are some pre-built CSS templates that you can use. I've already mentioned journals. So there is a LaTeX. Quarto is using LaTeX as its backend by default to create PDF documents. And a lot of journal templates have been written up as an extension which you can use. So if you go to this Quarto journals page on GitHub, you can see a list of the journals, which includes the American Statistical Association, for example. So that should hopefully take the hassle out of putting together these big articles. You can just focus on the main text and not worry too much about the format. You can also create parameterized reports. So the way that works is in your YAML header, you can have a params field, and you can basically define parameters here, which can be specified from the command line. So just to show an example, let's say you're rendering a Quarto document. Um, you can render from inside RStudio, but you can also run this from the command line. So you can run Quarto render and then give the name of your Quarto file, and then you can specify any parameters which have been defined in the YAML header. And it just means then that within the report, your code cells can access these parameters. That becomes really powerful because you might, for example, you might be producing like a monthly sales report with the latest customer churn data, and you might have like the date as one of the parameters for that, or you might only want to look at a specific subset of customers, so you can feed that in as a parameter. It also becomes powerful when you want to actually automate these processes, so you could actually have like a daily job on like AWS or Connect, for example, which essentially regenerates your Quarto document on a schedule using the latest data. And again, using parameters like this can help to kind of automate that. So it's very hands off. I've had a question from the chat. Has Jumping Rivers explored the TIPST PDF output as an alternative to LaTeX PDF? That's a good question. I did actually see a talk about TIPST, which came up at a conference I was attending last year. I've not actually used it myself, and I don't know the full details of the differences between TIPST versus LaTeX. But there is documentation for this in the Quarto documentation. So I think the idea is that TIPST is it's meant to be kind of much easier to learn and use, and it should make sort of beautiful PDF outputs with less effort. On the other hand, it might not be as flexible as LaTeX. So LaTeX is probably still going to be the most flexible option for as a backend for creating PDF reports. But there's probably a bit more work involved. So yeah, I should mention as well, when you're creating a PDF from Quarto, you can have PDF specified as the format here, and you can insert your Markdown text. You can also insert raw LaTeX text if you want as well. So you can actually insert raw LaTeX inside the document, and that will all be run as expected. So you can sort of mix together raw LaTeX code with Markdown code, and I think it's a similar story for TIPST as well. So yeah, that may well be worth looking into if you are interested in PDF reports. This is like an alternative to LaTeX for this. Just to mention a few other use cases. So like I said, you've got multi-language support with Quarto. So everything we've seen in those examples where I used R code, you can do all of that with Python as well. The only differences are when you're creating these code cells, you would fence the code cell with Python instead of R. You can and there's a few other differences too. So things like when you're writing inline code, there's some differences in the syntax for inline code with Python as opposed to inline code with R. So I just recommend having a look at the Quarto documentation again, just to see some of those distinctions. But in general, you can use both of these kind of interchangeably. What I also really like about Python for Quarto is when you're setting up your document, you can specify the engine. Now, by default, Quarto will use knitr if the first code cell is an R code cell. On the other hand, it will use Jupyter by default if the first code cell is a Python code cell. But what's really nice is you can actually specify a custom Jupyter kernel here. So let's say you're working on a project, you've got a virtual environment that you've set up with just the dependencies for that project. You could create a Jupyter kernel based on that virtual environment, and then you could specify that kernel as the engine for your report. So when it comes to producing that final report, you're basically guaranteeing that all the Python engine that's being used to produce the report, it's indistinguishable from the Python engine that you worked on the project with. So that's I think quite powerful. You can also publish and share your documents. So Quarto Pub is kind of the go-to. It's free to use. You can publish public documents and sites. The only requirement here is that they must be public documents, so you can't restrict access with Quarto Pub, but otherwise it is free to use. I often use GitHub Pages to host HTML sites. So let's say you've got a free GitHub account. As long as you're willing to have a public GitHub repository, you can host what are called GitHub pages. And the way that works is if you've got an index.html file within that repository, that will automatically then be hosted on a public web page by GitHub, which you can then share. So let's say you're giving a talk, you want to be able to share your presentation slides with the attendees. You can just give them a link to your GitHub page, or create like a tiny URL or something like that, which redirects to that link, and that's quite useful. You can also publish Quarto documents directly to Posit Connect. Quarto and Connect are both maintained by Posit, so they sort of integrate quite nicely with each other. And the bonus here is you can then have restricted visibility. So if you only want the report to be visible within your local company, or to select users only, you can have much more control over restrictions here. But then, of course, you're then looking at spending some money to do this. This wouldn't be free to set this up. Just an extra tip as well, if you're creating an HTML and you want to host that, it's possible to embed all of the resources within the document. So if I go back to this, this report here, where I was using the HTML format, if I want to, at the moment, if I wanted to share this document across the web, wherever I'm hosting my HTML file, I would need to make sure that all of the local files are also hosted at that location. So I have to make sure that this image, for example, is hosted. The plots that have been generated for the report, these would all need to be hosted there as well. So it means you've got quite big, basically it means everything has to be kind of generated before you post it. If you use embed resources and set that to true, it basically means that it will keep the plot and the image files as part of the document itself. So you don't have to share these things separately. They all get shared as a single HTML, and the images are just embedded just automatically. It does mean the HTML file size is a bit bigger, but it just means you can then just share a single HTML file. You don't have to share all of these extra documents. Cool. We're running a little bit short of time, so I'll just give a few use cases at Jumping Rivers for where we've used Quarto as well. Then we'll see if you've got any more questions. So at Jumping Rivers, we run a Posit health check for our clients where we review infrastructure like Connect, Workbench, and Package Manager. As part of this, we produce a recommendations report, which previously was written up manually. We've now updated this process so that this report gets automatically generated using Quarto. So we've got a really nice PDF template that we've built for this process, which I'm showing you now. So it is possible to get really attractive PDFs through Quarto. If you're interested in any of our other engineering services, you can use this link here. So jumpingrivers.com/engineering. We also have a service called Litmus, which we use for package validation. So the Litmus First is like a suite of bespoke tools that we've developed in-house, and this is used for risk assessment of our packages. So for example, a client might provide us with a list of packages that they want to be validated. We'll produce risk assessment reports and scores. And again, we use a Quarto PDF output for this. If you're interested in Litmus, you can have a look at jumpingrivers.com/litmus to find out a bit more about that service. We also offer around 50 different training courses. All of these involve a mixture of PDF notes, HTML slides, and scripts. Because all of our courses are following a kind of similar structure, it made sense that we use something like R Markdown to set these up. So that's what we've done kind of over the years. We've built these up using R Markdown. So we've got consistent formats for the notes and for the slides. We do also have plans to start to migrate these across to Quarto in the near future, just to have easier sharing of notes via the web and that sort of thing. What I'll do is before the Q&A, I'll just bring up some final useful links for you, and then we can go through any final questions that you have. So just a reminder that the monthly webinar schedule, the next webinar will be 18th of September, which will be building scalable Shiny apps. We've got a number of other webinars in the schedule for October, November, December, covering Posit, machine learning with Python, and accessible Shiny. If you want to keep up to date with all of that, make sure you're following us on LinkedIn. So it's Jumping Rivers Limited at LinkedIn. And then you'll be kept up to date with all of these webinars. Like I said as well, we're also hosting Shiny in production on the 8th and 9th of October, which is basically a half day of hands-on workshops followed by a full day of talks by expert speakers from far and wide. It's an in-person conference taking place at the Catalyst in Newcastle upon Tyne. We hope to see you there. If you're interested, you can register at shinyinproduction.jumpingrivers.com. And just a reminder, you've got this discount code for 30% off the registration. So I'm going to leave this final slide up with links and resources, including some links to Quarto documentation, Awesome Quarto, which has got a lot of tips for templates and that sort of thing. GitHub discussions, which is a really great forum for Quarto. I've also left up the links to the Jumping Rivers blog, where we're regularly posting about topics such as Quarto and dashboards and all sorts of things. The link to our training courses, and also the discount codes for training and Shiny in production. Okay, so I'll leave that link up in case you want to take a screenshot. Now, we've got another question that's come through the chat, so I'll answer that first. If you do have any other questions, feel free to continue to posting these in the Q&A or raise your hand. I'm happy to stay on until about 5 minutes past 2 since we're starting this a bit later. But yeah, so we've got one question saying for the Word output, so for the Microsoft Word output, can you insert captions for the tables and the figures like those in Word that do automatic numbering? Yeah, it's a good question. So what you can, yeah, I believe the way it works, so Quarto by default will take care of, so in the same way that like LaTeX, for example, will automatically take care of like the numbering of figures and that sort of thing. Quarto does this by default. So whether you're producing a PDF output or an HTML report or Word report, things like the section numbering, the figure captions, all of this will automatically be updated automatically, so you don't have to specify that this is figure 1.2, 1.3. Quarto does that just automatically by default. You might still need to use a style that guarantees that you have got figure numbers, because it might be that the default captions don't feature numbers. So yeah, that should be pretty straightforward to set up. So yeah, you can definitely have captions. There is, whenever you have a code chunk that's used to produce a plot, like the plot I've got here, I was able to insert a caption for that plot. And the way that you insert a figure caption is you just use the fig cap code chunk option. And you know, if my output format was Word in this case, that would automatically then add the captions to that Word document. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to work with Quarto and Word at the same time. There's also a package called Officer, which is quite interesting, where I'll need to find that. Here we go. Yeah, so we've got a blog on Officer, and essentially the way that works is you can create template PowerPoints or template Word documents in Microsoft, but then you can use, yeah, you can basically like auto-populate the templates with certain figures and certain tables. So Officer is like an alternative package for kind of automated Microsoft documents, whether it's Word or PowerPoint. So it might be worth looking into that as well. It's kind of like an alternative to Quarto, but this requires you to create that template within Microsoft first before you insert the content. Cool. Any other questions? We've got another question. Is there a way to track changes and comments made to Word or PDF documents made using Quarto? Yes, good question. So one of the big advantages of Quarto is that because Quarto, when you look at just a raw Quarto file, it's just a plain text file. Okay, it's just a text document. There's no like binary code or anything like that. It's just an easy to read text file. What's nice about that is that Quarto then, it means you can track changes to a Quarto document using Git. So in the same way that you use Git to track changes to, say, Python or R programming projects, you can also use Git to track a Quarto report, because it's just plain text. Basically, it's really easy to kind of get a change log to see what's changed between different versions of the report, and you'll see that all in terms of the raw Quarto code. And then on a similar note, because you can then store multiple versions of your documents in Git, you can retrieve any past version through your commit history, and then you could just re-render the Quarto file at that given version, to get back the old PDF or the old Word document that you had. So generally what I would do is I would only track the QMD file in Git. I wouldn't actually track that output PDF file or the output LaTeX file, or the output Word file. I would just track the QMD file, and then it's a nice way then to kind of view the changelog. You and your colleagues can then leave comments on individual lines of code. It can go through a proper code review process, but I can still retrieve previous versions of that document as well. So that would be my recommendation for tracking changes and comments for Quarto. Any other questions? It is 2 o'clock now, I should say. But yeah, I'm happy to stay behind a few more minutes if there's any other questions. Okay, if there are no other questions, all that remains to say is thank you again so much for coming today. We're really, really happy to see the turnout. I think we had around 50 attendees at peak. So that's a really, really great turnout for the first of our webinars. And yeah, we hope to see some of you again at our future webinars. So thank you very much, and hopefully see you again in future.